Some are scandalized that this is happening in America and in the year 2020. While we are heartbroken and angered by this senseless murder, we are not surprised that it took place. Rather, we believe the video serves as a metaphor for America's racial history. It shows us how race functions in this society and how to address it. First, notice how Derek Chauvin was perfectly at ease the entire time his knee was on George Floyd's neck. If you do not look at George Floyd, you would have no idea Chauvin was squeezing the life out of a human being. While it's easy to denounce Chauvin and say we reject racism, Chauvin also represents economic, judicial, social, and educational systems that institutionally squeeze the life out of Black people. It's easy not to see what this system is doing to Black people when you do not focus on them. Everything seems normal and perfectly in order, just like Chauvin's demeanor and body language. Each of us in America is part of a system that is actively suppressing Black people and people of color. Americans on both the right and the left have been unable or unwilling to see themselves in the position of Chauvin and consequently claim personal innocence and no need to get up. Second, Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as Koenig put pressure on Floyd's back, Lane held his legs, and Tao stood guard. This is a very long and a very short time. It's a long time not to acknowledge that they were taking the life of another human being. However, 400 years is a long time not to realize that our society has collectively been involved in this very process. The pressure exerted over this period was slow and steady, gradually stifling Floyd's breath in multiple places. This is how systemic racism operates. Bias, explicit and implicit, in job interviews, derogatory comments made in school, speaking over Black colleagues, prejudicial policing, and generational poverty. None of these alone does the job, but the perpetual and persistent pressure applied on all parts of Black lives and bodies can and regularly does. 8 minutes and 46 seconds is also a short time. George Floyd was alive for 46 years, but 8 minutes and 46 seconds was all it took to end his life. In this country, it only takes the time for a panicked phone call or one moment of an officer's fear for a Black life to end. American racism is genteel, pervasive, and protracted, but it is simultaneously violent, focused, and instantaneous. We see both sides in this video.
Third, Floyd informed officers multiple times that he could not breathe. He even had the good manners to ask those who were killing him to please let him stand. Consider this again. George Floyd had been trained to use his manners to ask his murderers politely to spare his life. He did so 16 times. This is education and protest. Officer Lane asked if they should listen and adjust positions to let Floyd breathe, but took no action. How many times will Black people have to inform this country that they cannot breathe? How many times will Black people have to ask to have their oppression lifted? The reality of America's racial sin is that Black people cannot solve it on their own because it is not their problem. They can only inform the broader society that it is in the wrong and protest by asking America to change its stance. However, because of our collective attachment to perceived racial innocence, it is the innocence which constitutes the crime, as James Baldwin put it. Nothing will change if we cannot first accept the message and admit responsibility. That is something George Floyd could not accomplish, and people of color cannot either. Thomas Lane listened, spoke good words, but carried on anyway. Finally, when Chauvin and Officer Tao were confronted by witnesses, they sought to use force to maintain what they believed was law and order, but only succeeded in ensuring rather than averting tragedy. We have seen this time and again in American history. Threats and exercises of force were used to keep Black people in their lawful place. On plantations during slavery and sharecropping. It was done to protesters of all races during the Civil Rights Movement, and the same specter of force has been invoked against those who plead for justice for George Floyd. This only leads to further tragedy and conflict because it fails to acknowledge that the brand of law and order directing the force is immoral. This video displays America's history of white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and widespread prejudice, which Rustein defined as an emotional commitment to ignorance. Perhaps the only surprise is that we are just now questioning our ignorance. The history of American policing makes the shame of our late awareness abundantly clear. The first forerunners of our police were Indian constables policing Native Americans here in New England to enforce the white right to rule and protect settlers from retaliation and resistance. Before the American Revolution, slave patrols were appointed to capture runaway property and punish slaves who dared to challenge the racial order. Natural resistance to this order led to a fear of perceived Black violence and criminality, as well as the sanctioning of excessive force, particularly because Black people were viewed as subhuman and their resistance was an economic, political, and physical threat to white supremacy and the American way of life. Laws such as the Fugitive Slave Acts allowed law enforcement to travel the length of the country literally to keep Black people in their place, just like Chauvin's knee.
We should be even less surprised that our police disproportionately arrest so many Black people. After emancipation, vagrancy laws allowed law enforcement to imprison unemployed Black people, essentially forcing them into sharecropping, the perpetuation of the plantation economy, and self-sacrifice on the altar of American capitalism. The refusal of such prejudicial employment was met with forced, unpaid labor in prison, ensuring control over Black labor either way. Our law enforcement was designed to limit the movement and freedoms of Black people and people of color, protect white Americans from them, and use force to maintain control. Given this history, we have never been dealing with a few bad apples, but rather a system of control that directs the actions of even the best intentioned towards ruinous consequences. We believe that the overwhelming majority of our police are good and well-intentioned. However, our entire system of law enforcement was designed to produce exactly what happened to George Floyd. Until we address and redress this fundamental lack of equality in law and law enforcement, such outcomes will continue. We should not be surprised when a hammer is used to hit a nail. Because Black people's exercise of and demands for equality and full citizenship have been criminalized and contradicted our social order, they have been interpreted as a problem for the police. The police have been the response to unrest in the Black community. The police have been the response to Black unemployment. The police have been the response to Black health crises. The police have never provided the solution because criminality was never the problem. The violation of Black humanity and rights at the hands of the United States is the source and real crime. It is unfair and unwise to put the burden of solving our race problem on our police, particularly when our police system was designed to support that same institution. The answer can only be resolving our issues of institutional inequality that will obviate any use of force by the police. As long as Black people are controlled and their rights denied, escalating the use of force has never resolved the problem. Still, America keeps trying the same militarized solutions to our race problem. Now we ask you, how long? How long until America believes Black people about explicit and implicit racism? How long until America chooses to listen to Black protests and cries for freedom? How long until we have a justice system that is applied equally to all citizens? How long before America names, owns, and atones for its original sin? How long until all Americans consider how Chauvin, Koenig, Lane, and Dow represent us individually and collectively? Many well-intentioned students and friends have asked us what they should be doing in this moment. While a problem so pervasive requires diverse and wide-reaching approaches and actions, we would like to ask all of you, especially those of you who are not Black, how often do you think about the racial impact and implications of everything that you do? Many Americans quickly began to consider their environmental impact in every aspect of life, from how we travel to what we buy, and even down to the small act of printing an email. This revolution took place in a matter of years without anybody needing to die. How long will it take before Americans afford as much introspection to how their life choices affect their Black brothers and sisters? If polar ice caps you've never seen can influence your life to such an extent, ask yourself why the same isn't true for people of color. If you do not regularly consider the racial impact of the various aspects of your life, the best, first, and perhaps only way to start is right there. And if you don't know how to assess the racial impact of your actions and choices, then you've already identified your first challenge.
It has taken just over 8 minutes and 46 seconds to listen to this statement, the same time it took for Derek Chauvin and his accomplices to squeeze the life out of George Floyd. We ask that all of you will join us in taking the next 8 minutes and 46 seconds to think about how your choices, your attitudes, your behaviors, your beliefs may be complicit in the systems of control that are even older than America. We hope that if all of us can do this honestly and sincerely, we can stop asking, how long? Please hold your space for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you for attending this event, for joining us, Africana Studies, to consider, to think together about this moment in our history, a very troubling one. If you have questions about this event or other ways in which you might be able to get involved and help, please contact the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. Thank you once again for coming tonight. Good evening.